This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good evening. My name is Jonathan. I am a tutor at Seeds of Literacy, and tonight we're going to talk about subject-verb agreement. It's very important, just basic foundational topic for forming good sentences, very important for language and reading. And let's get into it. So we're going to discuss the main rules surrounding the topic of subject-verb agreement, and we're going to discuss examples to demonstrate how each of the rules work in practice. So just generally, sentences will have a subject and a verb, and you're going to want to make sure that those agree in the ways that we talk about here today. So the verb in a sentence must agree with its subject in number. So what that means is a singular noun that is the subject in a sentence needs to agree with a singular verb in that sentence. Likewise, a plural noun needs to agree with a plural verb. So let's talk about singulars first. A singular verb is used with a singular subject, obviously, and what that means is that the singular form of a verb in its present tense form is really just adding an S or an ES to that verb. And singular subjects will not end in S. So they're kind of opposites, but when you're thinking about a singular noun, there will be no S on the end, obviously, because it's just one person or one thing or one country, or one fact, essentially, or another common subject are pronouns. So replacing a name with he or she, or replacing a thing with it. So the subject, singular subject, no S, needs to agree with a singular verb, which will have an S or an ES. And that form is used with a third person singular subject. So what this singular subject verb agreement is about really is that any subject that can be replaced with he, she, or it, those pronouns I was just referring to, that's third person singular. So, just for an example, the dog runs. So a dog is, there's one dog, singular subject, singular noun, and runs, the dog runs, it's not the dog run, it's the dog runs with an S on the end of the verb. That's a singular subject and a singular noun, a singular subject and a singular verb agreeing with each other to form, correctly formed sentence. So here are a few examples. The sun rises in the east. So the sun is a singular subject, a noun, and it rises in the east. Rise is the verb, and it has an S on the end because it's a singular verb, and it's agreeing with the singular subject. An angry mob gathers in the town square. So an angry mob might seem like a lot of people, but it's one mob, it's one collective group. And so in this instance, it's a singular subject. And so it needs to be accompanied by a singular verb. Gathers, in this case, again, the singular verb has an S on the end. Joe answers the questions one at a time. Joe, singular subject, just one person, Joe, answers the questions one at a time. And again, that singular subject could just be he for Joe, or the pronoun for Joe. And that would still be answers with an S on the end. Singular subject, Joe, singular verb, answers. And like I said, he, she, and it. So this is an example of the it. Often a good dessert disappears in minutes. So a good dessert, it, disappears in minutes. Disappear has an S on the end, singular verb that's linked together with a singular subject. Okay, here are a couple words that always take a singular verb: each, every, and one. And we're going to run through a couple of these singular subjects that just always take a singular verb. So they're ones that you really just kind of want to remember. And so when you see them, you know not to get thrown off by other words in the sentence, and really to just make sure that It's a singular subject with a singular verb. And so an example of each student has an ID card. So this is a good sentence for a couple things. Obviously, each, it's taking a singular verb, and also the verb here, have, becomes has in this singular context. So every is another one. Every person needs love. So every person, needs is the verb, and the singular version of that verb has an S on the end, like we've been saying. So one is another one. One source of energy is the sun. And so one is modified by is being the singular verb form of be. Here are a few more that always take singular verbs, and these are called indefinite pronouns. So I've been discussing pronouns a lot, mainly because they're common subjects when you're forming sentences. And here are just a list of some indefinite pronouns that take singular verbs. So anybody, anyone, anything, somebody, someone, something, everybody, everyone, everything. You get the idea. These indefinite pronouns can be singular subjects and they will take singular verbs. So you need to make sure they agree. And here's a couple examples of that. Somebody is at the door. Somebody, singular subject, is singular verb. Anyone who knows a second language can apply for the position. So anyone is a singular subject. Knows with an S on the end is a singular verb to make this sentence agree. Okay, and I've touched on these both already, but these are just two important notes to remember about singular subjects and verbs. Be, like I said, it has two singular forms. We already discussed is, like he is, she is, it is. But when you're referring to a first person I, it's am. So I am going to the mall, or he is going to the mall. So those are the two singular forms for be, am and is. And then, like I said before, regarding have and has, so the singular form of the verb have is has. He, she, or it has done, whatever. And if it's plural, then it would be they have. But we'll launch into that in 1 second here. Okay, so we've gone through the singular subject and singular verb. Singular subjects obviously do not end in S. Singular verbs do end in S. And we talked about kind of some of the differences. We talked about some of the specific words that always take a singular verb. Now let's turn to the plural. So plural subjects end in S, obviously, because those nouns are talking about more than one, whether it's dogs or whether it's cats, or just, humans. So the plural form of a verb is going to be the present tense form to link up with that plural subject. And the plural verb will not end in S. And then just another note on be, the plural form of be is are. So we are, you are, they are. So whereas the singular is am or is, the plural is are. Okay, so here are a couple examples of plural subjects and plural verbs and making sure that they agree. So effective salespeople show the usefulness of their products. So in this instance, salespeople is a whole bunch of people all kind of doing their own thing. So this is a plural subject. If it was one collective, like a country or some specified unit, like the sales unit shows the usefulness of their products, that would be a singular instance. But here we're talking about many salespeople, and effective salespeople show the usefulness of their products. So a plural subject with a plural verb, which means no S on the end. Several vines climb up the porch wall. Several vines, plural subject, climb, no S, plural verb. Scientists search for the causes of illnesses. Scientists searches for the causes of illnesses. That's incorrect. That just sounds odd. Scientists are plural, so the plural verb would be search with no S. Okay, and here's a quick note before we launch into some wordier sentences, is that you don't want to get distracted by extra words that might be in between a subject and a verb. So subject-verb agreement is really easy if it's just the dog runs. Singular subject with a singular verb that ends in an S. But sometimes there's going to be sentences where a phrase is going to have a subject and then there's going to be some other words in between the subject and the verb that might kind of confuse you. You're not really sure what's what. It might be a little bit more difficult to pinpoint the subject and to pinpoint the verb. And so you just want to realize that the verb needs to agree with the subject and not just the last word in the phrase or the word that's right next to it. So it's just a rule you want to think about. And so when you're reading a sentence, you make sure that you identify the subject, identify the verb, and you can cut out any words that aren't important for making sure that there's agreement in the sentence. And so the thing that I like to do in those situations is almost kind of cover up some of the words between the subject and the verb, just so I don't get confused. And so here's a couple examples of that. The color of those clouds suggests a coming storm. So the clouds suggest a coming storm. So if it was just the clouds, that's a plural subject, and it would need a plural verb, suggest, with no S. But here we're talking about the color of those clouds. The color is a singular subject, and so it needs a singular verb, suggests, with an S. So those clouds might confuse you a little bit, but you really want to make sure that you're understanding that the sentence subject is the color of those clouds, a singular subject. Now here's an example of a plural like that. Lightning flashes splitting the sky show the arrival of a storm. Lightning flashes, multiple flashes, this is a plural subject. Now the sky is a singular subject, so the sky shows the arrival of a storm. But here we're talking about lightning flashes, plural subject that needs a plural verb, show the arrival of a storm. And so, like I said, sometimes it's helpful to just kind of cover up the words in between and make sure that you're really just reading the subject and then the verb. And a lot of times it's still going to make sense if you cut out those words. So lightning flashes show the arrival of a storm. Still understand what the sentence is saying, and now you're able to make sure that the subject and the verb agree without getting confused by some of the extra words that are in the sentence. Okay, so we have singular and we have plural. Now I want to talk about compound subjects. So compound subjects they have two or more parts. So there's going to be more than one subject in the sentence. And there are two big rules to remember with compound subjects. The first is that when the parts of a compound subject, let's say two names or two things, when those are joined by the word and, a plural verb is needed. So when the parts of a compound subject are joined by the word and, a plural verb is needed. Now, when the parts of a compound subject are joined by or, the verb is going to agree with the closest subject that's to the verb in the sentence. So if there's two subjects and they're separated by or, you're going to look to the one that's closest to the verb to figure out how they agree. And I'll show you both these right now. Okay, so with and, you're going to have a plural verb. This first one, peas and lettuce are cold weather crops. Now, as we discussed earlier, are is the plural version of be, and peas and lettuce compound two subjects. A plural subject needs a plural verb are. And that's kind of our first rule. So now here's our second rule. Roses or a hibiscus is my top choice for this sunny location. So a hibiscus, just one flower, is my top choice for this sunny location. So this is a singular subject that is closer to the verb, and so you use a singular verb. Now, if those were flipped, roses, plural, would be closer to the verb, and so you would use a plural verb. So it would say a hibiscus or roses are my top choice for this sunny location. So if you have and separating your subjects, when you have compound subjects in a sentence, then you're using a plural verb. But if you have an or separating those compound subjects, then you're going to go with the subject closest to the verb to determine whether it's singular or plural. Okay, now here are a couple that I just want to touch on because they're in the lessons and they're important ones to know just so you don't get confused. These are verbs that have similar meanings, and really kind of the best way to deal with these is to just memorize what they mean. So one of those is accept and accept, A-C-C-E-P-T versus E-X-C-E-P-T. So to accept something means to take or receive willingly. Except, E-X-C-E-P-T, means other than or leaving out. And they sound the same, so it can be tough, and you really just got to be able to understand their context. If you know what they mean, then you're going to know which one is appropriate in which sentence. And here's examples. The baseball team's manager refused to accept ACCEPT defeat. So refused to willingly take defeat. He wanted to win. Everyone except the manager thought the team would lose. So everyone except the manager, you're excluding the manager, thought the team would lose. So when you're talking about excluding somebody or something, it's EXCEPT. If you're talking about taking in or willingly receiving, then it's ACCEPT. Accept and accept. Okay, here's a couple more. Rise and raise. So raise means to lift, and rise means to go up. And then set and sit. So set just means to place something down, and sit means to rest, like in a chair. Okay, and here's just a couple of those in practice. I like to sit in the bleachers to watch the game. So to rest on something, just sit on the bleachers. The family set, so placed the settings on the table for dinner. And then with rise and raise, the spectators rise when the team runs onto the field, and let's raise a glass to toast his retirement. So raise, lift, and rise to go up. Okay, and here's another one that it's important to remember because, you know, if you ultimately are taking a high school equivalency test or just working on some of these lessons, you need to make sure that you're really kind of practicing good techniques for formal writing. And so that's why we're going to distinguish between have and of. So you should never be using of as a helping verb with could, would, or should. So when you're talking, you'll say could've or coulda or woulda or shoulda. Every time you have the inclination to say that, you need to use the word have instead of. So we should have gotten off the freeway at the last exit. We should have gotten off. Maybe that's how we talk, but that's not how you want to write. We should have gotten off the freeway. Gene would have helped us move. And Marty could have learned how to fix the car. So when you have a could, would, or should in a sentence, your helping verb is going to be have, not of. Okay, we've covered a few things here. I'd like to just run through a couple of just mixed examples. Charlie and George climb the stairs every night. So this is a compound subject, two people. We have and separating them, so it's going to be a plural verb. It's a plural subject with a plural verb. So climb the stairs, no S on the end of the verb. And there you go. But Jim and Tasha's dog barks all the time. So Jim and Tasha are two people, but Jim and Tasha's dog is just one dog. They have one dog. He barks all the time. And so that's a singular subject, the dog. And so it calls for a singular verb, barks, with an S on the end. 3 small bowls or the single large one fills the shelf. Okay, here's a compound subject with or. So like we discussed before, you need to look to the subject that is closest to the verb to determine the agreement. So 3 small bowls would fill the shelf, but it's 3 small bowls or the single large one fills the shelf. The single large one, singular subject, fills the shelf. Singular verb with an S on the end. Please accept my apology for the misunderstanding. That's accept. Please willingly receive my apology for the misunderstanding. ACCEPT. And then that have that we were just talking about instead of, the shipment shouldn't have been left without a signature. Okay, here's a few more. She and her friends are at the fair. Compound subject, separated by and. So she is a subject, her friends are a subject. They're separated by and, so that's a plural subject, and it calls for a plural verb. The plural of be is are. She and her friends are at the fair. The book or the pen is in the drawer. So we have 2 subjects again, but this time they're separated by or, and so you're going to look to the one that's closest to the verb. Now here, they're both singular subjects, but together they'd be plural. So the fact that there's an or means you're going to look to the one closest to the verb. In this case, it's the pen, and so it is a singular subject, and it calls for a singular verb. The singular of be is. So the pen is in the drawer. Okay, the boy or his friends run every day. So the boy runs every day. Singular subject with a singular verb. But we have that or, so we're going to look to the subject closest to the verb. His friends, a plural subject, calls for a plural verb, run. Here's the opposite of that. Like I just said, his friends or the boy runs every day. So the boy runs every day. There you go. And if we remember, we were talking about singular verbs and singular subjects. Each, everyone, or one, those are going to call for singular verbs. Those are singular subjects that call for singular verbs. So one of the boxes is open. So one is open. The boxes are open. But since we're only talking about one, is open. Okay, now these are some that I wanted to introduce because sometimes you're going to have words or phrases in between the subject and verb, like I was mentioning before, and you don't want them to throw you off. And so, like I said, sometimes it's good to just cover them up or just kind of forget about them and make sure that the subject and the verb agree and that the sentence flows correctly. So the president, accompanied by his wife, is traveling to Russia. So accompanied by his wife, or including, or together, or as well. There's a variety of phrases or words that are incorporated into sentences that don't impact the subject-verb agreement. So accompanied by his wife here can just be covered up because the president, singular subject, is traveling to Russia, singular verb. All of the DVDs, including yours, are in that box. So all of the DVDs, plural subject, are in that box, a plural verb. Everybody knows Mr. Smith. So everybody is one of those words that I brought up earlier, like each and one, and basically any of those indefinite pronouns, so anybody or nobody. Everybody knows Mr. Smith. These are singular subjects that call for singular verbs with an S on the end. Everybody knows, with an S, Mr. Smith. And lastly, the team captain, as well as his players, is ready to play. So as well as his players are obviously plural, but that's not the subject here. The team captain is the subject. There's some extra words in there that you can't let throw you off. The team captain is ready to play. Singular subject with a singular verb. So I just want to summarize all the things that we talked about. So we have the singular subject. It does not end in S, but it's going to be accompanied by a singular verb, which does end in S. And we covered a couple different words that I just talked about: each, everyone, other indefinite pronouns that are always going to be accompanied by singular verbs. Plural subjects are accompanied by plural verbs. So plural subjects end in S and plural verbs do not. So to recap those, singular subjects do not end in S, singular verbs do. Plural subjects end in S and plural verbs do not. And so we don't want to be misled by phrases between the subject and the verb. Like I said, a lot of times you need to just cover up those words, identify the subject, identify the verb, and then make sure they agree based on whether they're singular or plural. And the rule for compound subjects, if they're joined by and, then you need a plural verb. If they're joined by or, then you're going to use the part of the subject closest to the verb to determine whether it's singular or plural. And then lastly, I discussed those verbs that you want to go back and just really try to memorize what they mean so that you understand their context. And those are kind of the basics. I mean, subject verb agreement, it's very important in terms of forming the right sentence structure and really kind of the start of your writing and the start of your language skills. So I hope that this has been helpful, and I'd be willing to take some questions. Thanks.
Could you just go over how you identify what the subject is if there are multiple nouns before the verb?
Yes. Okay. What's the best way to do that?
So maybe if we look at one of those sentences that has like extra words. Oh yes, this is a great one. The color of those clouds.
Yep. Okay, so in terms of identifying what the subject is when there are multiple nouns at the beginning of a sentence, or really anywhere in the sentence, because the subject doesn't always have to be at the beginning, you're basically reading the sentence and trying to determine essentially what is kind of the main idea in the sentence, what is the main subject in the sentence. So the color of those clouds suggests a coming storm. So you see color and you see clouds, they're both nouns, they both seem like perfectly good subjects. And so you really want to ask yourself what the sentence is saying. The color of those clouds suggests a coming storm. So the subject is color because this sentence is trying to convey that it's the color of the clouds that suggests the storm, not just clouds. You could have nice, thin, white clouds on a beautiful day with a blue sky, but we're talking about these dark, gray, black clouds that are conveying the sense that there's going to be a storm soon. So when you read a sentence like this, you're really looking to understand what the subject, what the main purpose of the sentence is, what the main idea of the sentence is, to find out if there's more than one noun, which one of those nouns is the subject. And here it's clear that the color, not just the clouds, the color of the clouds suggests a coming storm.
Yeah, that's great. The way I think about it sometimes too is which noun is doing the action, kind of what or who is doing the thing in the sentence, is actually doing the verb.
Right. Should I say that as well?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Got it. But yeah, that was great. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have anything else to wrap up with.
No, I don't think so. Oh, sorry. I just saw this chat. I wasn't looking at it.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
We addressed it.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I was like a little worried about, I feel like I have such like an informal approach to